The thing is where you've got some scientists, let's look who's paying them. Because you've got some scientists that, that I've seen people get very selective on how they, which studies they use.
Is it because of grant money and grants?
Yeah, that's right. Let's say you're an ocean scientist and you're getting big money grants from the government. Well, let's say I'm an ocean scientist. I'm just making up a scenario here. And I got 5 graduate students working for me, and I've been getting a whole lot of government grants. I can't say something that's going to tick off the people that give me my grants.
Right.
You see, this is where there's
But can you or can you not? I mean, how do we? That's such a huge dilemma.
Well, it's a huge dilemma because you can shut down his lab.
Yeah, but you're talking about something that may be good or bad,
Well,
and yet
let's
you want to
just
focus
talk
on the
about
one instead
something
of
I
many.
know a little that I'm very much closer to.
Okay.
Problems in figuring out like what medications might work in autism.
Okay.
Okay. Right now they just do these studies and they show medication X works better than placebo. Well, only aspirin probably works better than placebo. They're not doing real proper kind of studies where you compare an existing treatment against the new thing. Well, who's funding those studies? It's mainly the drug companies. One of the places where the government needs to be funding more studies is doing really fair comparisons to find out which treatments do work the best.
Yeah.
But you see, when you have a vested interest to sell a particular pharmaceutical, then you're not going to do those studies.
Seems like a problem that will continue getting our way as we move forward. This won't change, will it?
Well, the problem is let's say you're that oceanographic scientist, and you got 5 graduate students. Your lab is like 90% funded by government grants, and you start to come up with some results they don't like. Well, you put it in the results section, but the discussion tends to get really slanted. and fortunately, on the things I've done, I've not let that happen. Because a lot of the research that I've done, I've funded myself from speaking fees and book money.
You're independent. We've stayed independent. We're trying to be Consumer Reports and Switzerland in this whole process. When we actually come across a new NGO that we're interacting with, their first thing, who is you? What's your affiliate? What's this going to be used for? Well, we're looking to just document this. We're looking to be Switzerland, because we can't move forward a lot of times because we've got other vested interests with stuff, and that's what I want to stay out of, is having.
Yeah, and then of course you got to have a source of funding. And I've been,
out of my ass $500,000 the last 5 years.
Well, I've been, made quite a lot of money in speaking engagements, book money, and things like that. And I've put 4 graduate students through school to get PhDs, and the 5th one will be graduating hopefully in December. And
right
he's already lined up for a job. Those are students that I bankroll. That's doing something of value. But there's pressures where, in order to be totally independent, you got to have a source of funding where you're not beholden to the funder. Because let's say you were that oceanographic researcher with 5 graduate students, working down in the Gulf, and he's getting grants from the government. Well, if he gets him too angry, his whole livelihood's down the drain.
Right.
You expect him to put his livelihood down the drain?
No.
See, that's the problem that you have.
Right.
And there's studies that don't get done because people don't want to know. They don't want to know the results. So the study just never gets done. And that's true in a lot of fields.
Yeah.
There's certain things people don't want to know. I've found even on animal stuff that... I noticed an interesting thing that's happened is I did a paper this summer at the animal science meetings on emotions in farm animals, and I went back and I looked up all this old literature, and the physiology literature and the neuroscience literature that shows that rats and cats definitely have emotions, but that just stayed over in the neuroscience literature. Then you go in the veterinary and the animal science literature. Oh, the word fear, don't like to use. Those kind of words. We'll call it agitation and excitement. I've been kind of bridging the gap there and loading it with 10 zillion times of references. So it isn't just one study. They do have emotions. And it's all scientifically documented. Some of the research is 30 and 40 years old. Another mistake that people make is they don't go across disciplines. Everybody reads just their own journals. Okay, like the ethologists read their journals, the animal scientists read their journals, the veterinarians just read their journals, the behaviorist people just read their journals. I've always liked going across disciplines and reading things
Gives
in
you more
other disciplines.
three-dimensional view of things, doesn't it?
And people need to get out of their narrow hole and read a lot of stuff. Because sometimes the things that can really solve a problem are in another field. People get too hung up on, well, I just study cattle, or I just study pigs. Well, once you look at a whole lot of different things. Because, I found stuff in wildlife literature that's, relevant. Or I have a friend that's a nutritionist at the zoo, and the zoo people say, well, it's a zoo animal, so what you know about farm animal nutrition doesn't apply. I go, oh. She says, well, no, it does apply. This animal.
Why would they say that? Why would they make?
They sort of think a wild animal comes from a different planet than a domestic animal.
These are zoologists. These are people that are overseeing zoos. The scientists who oversee the zoos.
Well, people get very much into their own little narrow sphere, and they have a really hard time getting out of their own little narrow
Prideful a lot of times because it affects maybe their ego in this process.
Some of it's ego, but that doesn't explain all of it. I think some of it gets into how people think. See, my thinking's bottom up and associative, where the normal human mind gets a hypothesis and then tries to cram all the data into it. My mind works the opposite way. I take the bits and pieces and I put it together like a puzzle. It's bottom-up thinking, it's not top-down. Now, bottom-up thinking can be really useful, but to be a good bottom-up thinker, you got to have a lot of data shoved into the database. The normal human mind...
Otherwise, your foundation's going to be pretty thin.
Well, these don't have enough data to put together in things. But I was just thinking about today, about autism genetics, and they're finding it's little tiny code variations that are very variable and a lot of different genes involved, really complicated. It's you're not going to take it out of the genome because I think part of it's just normal variation until you get into some very severe stuff. And I think they'll find more specific things for that. Then I wrote a paper that I just read last night in Nature on variation in height. And variation in height has a zillion different genes involved in it. They're all genes involved with the skeletal, body formation. And where in the autism it has to do with brain formation. But again, it's a whole lot of little genes. So I'm going, well, here's a study on height that I think is got a lot of the same mechanisms that they're finding in autism. Now, an autism researcher even look at a height paper. One of the reasons why I look at a height paper is because I get journals like Science and Nature that got a lot of different fields in them. And then I read a lot of popular scientific magazines.
I actually go between, where I cross-pollinate is on my filmmaking, on all the different animal domains that we're working in, high technology and business. Because I want to understand how I can fit and wedge in what we're doing. I find what we're doing hard. Because I'm not taking a specific tact. I'm not saying we want to protect whales, or we want to protect seals, or we want to protect... I'm taking this tact that I want to understand all of what we're doing as humans with the animals.
Yeah.
Because I want to understand what's right and what's wrong, and I want to be able to have it right now so we can look back at it any time.
Yeah.
So we have that data, and there's not a lot of visual evidence. There's not a lot of video. You know what I mean? Even though we've had the ability to capture stuff for 120 years, there's a certain amount, but now there's this heavy push on entertainment. And I think this is entertaining enough. Do you know what I mean? I think there's enough really
it's
fascinating
getting
things.
kids interested. I mean, kids get interested in these video games, and I look at that, and I would have been a video game addict if those had been around when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And then I wouldn't have been out doing the things I did hands-on.
Right.
Now I'm at a point in my career where I'm lecturing and don't have a chance to do many hands-on things.
Yeah.
But I want to work on getting kids interested. The first thing you got to do is you got to get all electronic gadgets put away, except for a few things like the video camera.
Get them out
and get them out there. You got to expose them to it. I had a student. She's now a professor at Kansas State University, Lily Edwards. And Lily was a city girl from back east. She had done some behavior work with primates, mainly in a lab, and never had done anything before with either cattle or pigs. She got out of here. She liked the big animals. But she wouldn't have found out if she liked them until she actually worked with them. And she said, well, I'm busy this weekend. I got to go weigh cattle with Terry. Now, there was nothing to make her weigh cattle with Terry. She just wanted to do it.
Yeah.
You know, but if she hadn't been exposed to it, she wouldn't have gotten interested in it. It's that simple.
Let's head back to your place so we
Okay.
can get into the nuts and bolts of how to get these kids involved.